Hey everyone, what is going on? Hope you're all doing very well and welcome back to another video here on the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about some of the data that we've collected over the past several months, and we're going to take a look at the trends that we are now finding from all of these battery tests that we have done. Ultimately, what we're going to be piecing together here is looking at the performance that we get out of the packs as it relates to the C rating that we see on the label of a battery pack. Now, I do want to say all the tests that we've done thus far have come from what one would probably classify as the more inexpensive type battery packs, or the batteries that are more of the economy class. We have not yet jumped into the more expensive battery packs that are really high and good performing packs. As we're going through this video, I want you to comment down below on this question. Do you think that batteries over time are getting better or worse as it relates to the specifications that battery manufacturers are claiming on the label of a battery pack? And more specifically, I am talking about the C rating that we see on every single battery. Now, this is very important for us as hobbyists because we do need to have certain batteries to perform at a certain level for certain radio-controlled vehicles. If your radio-controlled vehicle is one that pulls a lot of power, you will need a high-performing battery pack. If your radio-controlled vehicle doesn't really pull all that much power, then you can get away with cheaper, more inexpensive, and lower performing battery packs. The fact that they're lower performing won't actually matter for those of you who are running setups that don't pull a lot of power. There's a lot of good setups out there on radio controlled vehicles that perform well that don't need the power. So it's not a matter of what's good or bad here. However, it does make a difference when we're expecting something to be good and that pack doesn't actually perform as good as we expected. For a radio controlled brushless motor, it's quite easy to see if that can perform well or not based off of specifications, based off of the weight of the motor, the size of the motor. All these things are going to tell real world results. However, when it comes to a lithium polymer battery pack, it's not the same. It's not the same because a lithium polymer battery pack, just by looking at it, we don't really know what kind of performance is going on inside that pack. Whether it's heavy, light, or what size it is, it doesn't really tell all that much about the performance of the pack. However, if you have been watching this channel a lot, you will know that on this channel, I highly recommend everyone to test the battery pack on their computerized charger to get an internal resistance reading. The internal resistance reading is the best and easiest performance metric that you can capture at home to see the level of performance that you're getting out of that pack. And if you take that value, you can place it right on the calculator on a radiocontrolinfo.com website, or you can do it right in the Patreon calc that we have here on the channel in order to determine how this corresponds to the actual C rating, the real C rating as it relates to the internal resistance of the battery. If you're a member of the Tier 2 RCexplained Patreon website, you're going to have all access to the battery sheet that we have online. This is going to come with all of the battery packs that we've tested since 2023 to date, and it's going to contain all the data of that pack's performance so that you're able to compare the packs that we've tested thus far. Every month we're trying to grow this out by at least one battery pack per month in order to get some form of chart that tells us the performance of the batteries. Before we dive into the charts, I do want to talk about one thing that I have noticed, and this is where you can make your comment in the section below. I would make the argument that over time, battery manufacturers, they're claiming some significant big numbers, but the batteries are performing less and less as good as they have years ago. And I'm noticing this general trend, and I think there's a few reasons why as to we are seeing this. This is definitely what my data shows, and we're going to get into that very shortly here. Before we dive into those charts, I do want to make a couple points. The first point is it does seem that over time there's a lot more battery manufacturers, or at least brands of batteries, that are coming out. This is going to mean that there's a lot more competition for batteries, and it possibly could mean that it's going to drive the price down. And if price is driven down, this means it's going to have to drive the cost to that brand or that manufacturer down as well. And if you do that, of course, you might be sacrificing in performance or other specifications as it relates to how good that battery pack is going to perform. And another point that I want to throw out there too is it's really easy for us as the consumer consumer to hop onto Amazon to buy a battery pack. I can do that here in Canada. There's a few different brands that are, widely used and widely recognized as okay battery packs. However, they didn't perform so good for me. I have one example of a battery that we did this. It was the very first battery pack that I actually placed on the channel. It wasn't using our standardized test method. However, it was using a bunch of metrics that we captured at that time. And the battery pack was an 8,000 milliamp hour battery, and it performed really, really poorly for that size and that C rating. And I got it off of Amazon. Amazon's very easy for us to purchase battery packs. But again, what I think here is that Amazon, if battery brands are throwing their packs onto Amazon, it requires them to be able to sell a lot of them. Volume is really what makes it possible on Amazon. And if you have volume, or if you want volume, you need to have good competitive prices to be able to drive that volume. And that's where we get back at the quality of the pack being driven by the cost that you have to put into that pack. So a couple reasons there as to why I think things are trending in a negative way. And let's move into the charts that we can take a look at the performance that we're seeing through these tests that we have done. Our very first graph shows a very strong relationship between the elements that we have placed onto this graph. This graph is titled the real C rating as a percentage of the labeled C rating versus our labeled C rating. So I want to explain the y-axis, which is that real C rating as a percentage of the label rating. And that essentially comes up by making a calculation of the real C rating based off of the internal resistance. Then we take that value, divide it by the label C rating, and this represents a percentage of essentially what that battery can deliver as a C rating realistically. And we're going to compare that against the x-axis, which is our labeled C rating. Now, I can also assure you on the right-hand side, we look at two battery packs actually at 100C as a label, and those values are actually stacked right on top of each other. We have two batteries that essentially performed the same, even though their capacities were very different. One was an 8,000 pack, and I can't remember what size the other one was because it doesn't really come up as a function of capacity in this specific measurement. So we do have two that perform rather poorly in this category. And what we have in the middle here is the R² value. This essentially takes our line of best fit and sees how tight the points are to matching that line of best fit. If all these points were on the line, it would be a 1.0. That's the best that you can get. But a score of 0.83 tells a very strong relationship between what we're actually looking at in this graph specifically. We can see that if you have battery packs that you're finding, and I found many on Amazon that perform upwards of 100C or more, and this is kind of the point that I'm making here. As you see more and more of these battery packs come out, odds are they're going to be down in this area of the graph where we have a rather poor performing pack based as a percentage of its labeled C rating, which means you're going to be under 20% potentially for those lithium polymer battery packs, which is extremely poor. When you look at batteries that are performing upwards of around the 40C mark, you can see that they are actually having, the real C rating as a percentage somewhere around 40 to 65% nearly, and that's measured and taking place right in this area of the graph. And then we have this center cluster where you have batteries that are labeled anywhere from about 60 to 75C, and they come out between 30 and 45%. Real C rating as a percentage of its labeled capacity. So it's interesting to see this dynamic and relationship here happening. In this specific graph, we have about 3 groups of batteries, and as we add more and more batteries to these graphs, we're going to see exactly how these shape up over time and see if this trend is true that we're talking about in this specific video. Let's now take a look at the second graph, which is measuring the average cell wattage. So much different than our last graph that we looked at. This one actually takes into consideration the performance that we get out of that battery and displays it on this graph. Now, we've taken the rating on the label, which represents our continuous current. So it's not just about the C rating, it's also taking into consideration the capacity here, which changes through the different packs. And when we look at this, we see that the R² value is 0.3315. It does say that there is a relationship, but that relationship is rather weak. And what we can see of this specific graph is that you got a bunch of points scattered all over the place, and the one that is showing that it can be good for 500 amps of continuous current being drawn from it actually performs the weakest, with an average cell wattage being delivered of 315 watts per cell. Very low. What's really interesting too is you look at the top performing cell in this category, and it's about 372 or so watts per cell, and that is from a pack that can't even deliver a full 200 on the continuous rating. This is essentially our lowest continuous rating value. The lower one is this. This is very close to the lowest, I should say. So it's interesting that that performs the highest. And then the last takeaway I want to look for on this graph is you don't see a major difference between the values. You see 370 watts versus 315. So the value, I'm specifically talking about the number. The number is not that significant in terms of a difference between top and bottom. However, let me assure you that the actual performance you're getting out of the battery pack is significant. This is going to make a big difference. You're not going to find batteries that deliver 370 something and then 205 or something. That would mean that the battery is just completely awful and would not survive in our applications. So this being somewhat tight, don't let that fool you based off of the cell wattage. These batteries are performing very differently, the one that's on the bottom versus the one here that's on the top. Let's jump now into the third graph that we have, and this shows the time to 3.50, and this one I want to show you because it's more of like a scatter of information. I didn't bother putting a line of best fit here because I don't really see a trend as it relates to the time to 3.50 volts versus our same continuous current rating. And you can see that battery pack that was performing at 500, it has the lowest amount of time. It can't even survive a couple seconds before that battery hits 3.50 volts, which is extremely weak and definitely not a 100C rated pack. And then you got other packs that deliver 40 seconds. You got this guy at 60 seconds. You got a good top performer performing upwards of 85 seconds or so. Then we have some other points here that are performing somewhere around 10 seconds, 30 seconds, and about the 45-second mark. So this here, obviously, if we have a bigger number, this is what we're looking for. We want to maintain the highest amount of voltage over a great amount of time so that we can deliver excellent performance over that period of time as well. So this is really what it sums up to looking like. Now, what I want to do to conclude this section of the video here is I want to conclude based off of the findings that we have here. We know that Amazon has a ton of batteries that we can buy off of it, and Amazon's really good if you're looking for those types of economy batteries that can get you some performance very quickly. Just you cannot expect that they're going to perform well. I can't wait until we dive into some more expensive batteries and look at what higher performing batteries will produce. And as this graph expands and becomes something more, we'll be able to see the relationships that we get from those batteries as well as we classify them as a performance battery versus one of your economy batteries. As I mentioned earlier, let me know in the comment section below what you think the overall trend is for batteries and lithium polymer battery packs. Do you think that this C rating is a good value that manufacturers are doing, very well with? Because if you ask me, the answer is definitely no, and that's why we're diving into this type of information. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, like the video if you do. Don't forget to hit that sub button so that I can see you guys in the next video. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next one.